I know.
Okay, seeing that we have a quorum, I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting of the Indiana Election Commission to order on today, Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020. Seeing the members present, I'll announce us: Chairman Paul Okeson, Vice Chairman Anthony Long, Member Susanna Wilson Overholt, and Commission Member Zachary Klutz. Also with us is the Indiana Election Division staff, Co-Director Angie Nussmeyer, and Andrew Lang will be standing in for both Brad King and Valerie Wardcha. And we also have Co-General Counsel Matthew Kochever. Also with us is Maria Collier from Stewart Richardson Deposition Services. And again, this is now the third time we've done this digital Zoom format. I'd just like to remind everyone, if we have any public testimony or discussion, that you please announce yourself when speaking, although I think Maria can see things on the screen easily, but please, just for the purposes of the record, state your first and last name and spell it for us, please. I'd just like to have the Indiana Election Division staff confirm that we have proper public notice for this meeting.
Confirmed, Chairman Okeson.
Thank you. So, as you all in attendance last meeting, our order 2020-40, in that order, we committed to having a meeting on this date today where we would consider, and I have the quote here, methods and procedures necessary to implement a vote by mail election for the primary election that has been postponed by Section 1 of Order 2020-37 should the public health disaster emergency necessitate such a change in election procedures. I guess the idea today is we have nothing to vote on. There'll be no orders that will be passed by this body, but rather this is more of a fact gathering mission, just to gather information and understand, should we get to a point where we need to change the parameters by which we've already all agreed to and how we run this election. We'll have more information to do so and can take that under advisement. I've talked at some length with my counterpart, Vice Chairman Long, about the procedures for today's meeting. I think the fairest way to do this, and I've asked Stewart Richardson to keep a clock for us, but is to allocate 15 minutes to each commission member and to use that time in any manner you see fit, whether that's to simply have dialogue or discussion with the other members or to invite input from the public. Stewart Richardson will manage via Zoom technology those members of the public that wish to be heard, should you so choose to allow that. I would ask that we confine public comment, if there is going to be any, to 2 to 3 minutes. I've also asked Stewart Richardson to keep time on that. If someone has something to expand upon and we all agree by simple consent that we want to hear more from them, we can certainly do that, but try to just keep some parameters for this meeting. Again, there will be nothing that will be voted on at this meeting, and at the conclusion of the round of 15 minutes, we will take that information under advisement and adjourn for the day. With that, there's no particular order. I would, I guess, start with my friend Vice Chairman Long, and Stewart Richardson's ready, and if there are no questions, and certainly if you don't want to use your 15 minutes, you can put it back. But with that, Vice Chairman, I'd hand it off to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would tell you that I do have one question of you. It's my understanding we're talking about two subject matters primarily today, and that's the, as you've already announced, the receiving of evidence and information regarding what, if anything, we may need to do for the vote by mail decision that as we get closer to the primary election. We also have, I've understood for discussion today, and hopefully I've invited both of our state party chairmen to come and address the commission on the subject of any needs that they may have with regard to their respective state conventions that the commission might be able to be a benefit for them. If they are going to be allowed some additional time at the end, that would be great. If not, Suzanne and I would like to donate or dedicate 5 minutes of our combined time to Chairman Hupford, Chairman Zodi, not each, but collectively, to come forward at some point, as the chair would deem appropriate, to discuss their convention activities, if that's all right with you, sir.
Yeah, and I apologize, Vice Chairman Long. It is on the agenda. I guess I was under the impression that maybe neither one of them were going to be present for this, and maybe as of this date didn't have anything of urgent matter for the commission to consider. But it is on the agenda. I apologize, and I will allow additional time should either or both of them want to address the commission.
That would be great. I do believe Chairman Zodi either is or will be on the meeting today, and certainly we wanted to make sure that both chairmen had an opportunity to address us, and so that there may be some consideration for their conventions. But I'll treat that as being a separate agenda item. And with that, yes, we would say that Suzanne and I would like to hear from the public. We want to hear, as far as, we don't want to call anybody specifically, but we want to open the floor and combine our time, if the chair will allow, so that we can use that for public input. We would request, I don't know how many people are signed on or that would want to speak. I assume they will know how to hold up their hand or know what to do to be recognized to speak. You have graciously indicated a desire to keep it from 2 to 3 minutes. It wouldn't bother me, and it would be appreciated if they could keep it under 2 minutes. That way we'll have an opportunity to get more people. And if they don't use all of our time, then so be it. We just will get done earlier. But the primary issues that we are interested in and want to be able to have input on, particularly relate to about 6 or 7 areas. I'm going to quickly go over them. I do want to preface this so that we have received about 220 pieces of public comment in written format. This has been circulated. I know that I have them on my desk and have read a large number of them, and will before our next meeting, which we believe by the logistics needs to be on or before May 17th to move forward to making some decisions. That they will all be digested, and I would encourage anyone who wants to speak today to follow up with more detail and written material, and would follow up even if you don't get to speak with written material, because we will read each and every one of those and take them into consideration. I would at this point ask that the public comments that we have received at the election division be received into evidence as a part of the minutes of this public hearing, and be a part of the minutes of our meeting, and make that in the form of a motion.
So I have a motion to take any of the evidence or written material submitted as part of the record for this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. It's unanimous. The motion passes.
And with that, what I and I'm sure Susanna wants to hear, we need to know what is the point that we at what point in time that we need to act to be able to implement any changes relative to a vote by mail election for the primary. What is our, I guess, drop dead date for that, based upon all the things that will follow in making that type of a decision? I would request an information from the division and the public, if they have information on what the budget by vote by mail election would be like into this election, and to see what our cost expenses compared perhaps to the cost expenses for in-person voting I'd like to know what detailed costs of our mail out ballot applications to all voters, or to mail ballots to voters for an election in Indiana, realizing the difficulties in a primary, knowing which ballots to mail. I think we need to know what process changes would need to be taken for counties to shift to vote by mail elections, taking into account the different types of machines that are currently being used in the counties. The deadlines, how would they change if we had a vote for various things occurring in a vote by mail election if there's no in-person voting? And perhaps a more comprehensive survey of the clerks and election administrators to get more input and information from them. And lastly, if there are best practices out there in other states that use vote by mail, the successes, I think it would be nice to have a report of those items for our consideration, and hopefully to learn from their successes and from their failures. But with that, Susanna, if you have anything that you want to add before that, but I would turn this over to the moderator to invite public comment, particularly in the areas of our concern, and we'll go from there. Susanna?
No, I guess, well, one other thing I'd be interested in hearing about, and this goes back to the amendments we had talked about at our last meeting, and those were offered because those are all issues that we feel strongly about, and that were, my understanding is they were discussed in depth during the negotiations over the last order, the terms of the last order that was agreed to. But I do think to the extent that members of the public have comments regarding the context or the context of those, content of those amendments, that had to do with extending the time for submitting absentee ballots and petitioning for relief to the extent that that complying with the minimum number of vote centers was not possible. Those types of issues. I mean, those are, if the members of the public want to comment on those, because again, those are things that, we think are, maybe significant factors in conducting these elections during this rather unusual time.
I'd ask the moderator to ask people if they want to speak and want to offer testimony or comments to us. Now's the time to speak up, or forever hold your peace.
Absolutely. I have 3 people with their hands raised. The first person that I will be unmuting is Deanne Hart. I'm going to do those permissions. Deanne, if you want to go ahead and speak, it looks like you just need to unmute yourself now.
Hello?
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Deanne Hart. That's DEE space ANNHART. I am here today in follow-up to some communication that the Indiana American Council for the Blind sent to you. Barbara Salisbury has been in touch with the Election Commission back in the end of March. The American Council for the Blind believes that the mail-in ballot should be extended, or the overseas and military ballot should be extended as an option, as that it allows for electronic transfer of our ballot, whereas with a mail-in ballot, it's in a print format and is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily allow us to do it independently or private. The information was sent to you, and I believe if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But I think our information that we sent to you was pretty thorough.
And we received that we show that March the 24th, I believe we received that.
Yes.
And it has been read and considered.
Okay. Thank you. And I guess the only other comment I would make is in the future, if we're going to look at other options for vote by mail or other mechanisms for voting, that the disability community be included in the discussion so that our needs are met. And that's all I have today. Share. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. I'm going to get that removed. The next person up, it looks like, is Chris Nardi. Just give me 1 second and I will unmute you. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Good morning. My name is Chris Nardi, CHRISNARDI. I am a politics major at Pomona College in Claremont, California, and I'm also a resident of Carmel, Indiana. I wanted to speak to you today because of the information I've learned as a politics major. I am a sophomore in my undergraduate studies. Firstly, I wanted to share that I agree that we should have some form of in-person voting for this election. For some members of our community, it's simply infeasible for them to vote by mail. For instance, as the previous speaker just noted, there are difficulties with some members of the disabled community, and also members of the homeless community may be burdened by having to vote entirely by mail. However, I do agree that there should be additional measures taken to encourage voting by mail. One measure to encourage voting by mail was offered in the amendments by Vice Chair Long at the previous meeting regarding sending a postcard or a letter to every registered voter in Indiana. I agree with this measure. I believe we can take more measures, however. So firstly, the Indiana voter registration database has email addresses for some members of the public who are registered voters. To start with, we should start by emailing the link to request an absentee ballot to every registered voter who has an email on file. However, we know this isn't going to be an entirely effective measure. A 2015 study shows that sending out a link to a place to request an absentee ballot is not as effective as physically mailing an application to every individual voter. So in sum, I suggest combining these two measures, emailing the link to every registered voter, and then following up for either those who don't have emails on file or who do not respond to the link in the requested time period. This would be expensive, yes. I do not have a number on that, Vice Chair Long, but I do know that the state is requesting $8 million from the Election Assistance Committee, and we should use some or all of that money to encourage voting by mail. This isn't necessarily just an option for ease of people voting, but this is also to protect people's safety. If we encourage more people to vote by mail, we know that fewer people could get infected with COVID-19 and potentially end up in the hospital. Furthermore, I suggest that we should expand the hours of having absentee ballots returned as offered in the amendments by Vice Chair Long. I'd be happy to follow up with any additional studies as requested by the Commission. I believe you should have all received my written communications sent about a week ago, and I'd be happy to follow up if necessary. Thank you.
We received that. It was sent in on April the 20th. I'm not going to be able to maybe call all of these up today as people speak, but that one I remembered reading. Pomona College stuck in my mind, and I looked it over earlier and saw here today that it was mailed in on the 20th of April.
All right, thank you, Chris. I'm going to get you unmuted again, or disabled. It looks like the next person to speak, and this is the last hand I see raised, is Randy Paul. We just had one more as well, but I'm going to get that unmuted. Randy, go ahead and speak. If you want to just unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Again, my name is Randy Paul, R-A-N-D-Y. Last name is Paul. I wanted to talk to you today. I also wrote you a couple of emails and a letter back in March. My concern is I'm running as a Green Party candidate in Monroe County for county commissioner. And as you well know, a third party candidate has to have X number of signatures on a petition to have ballot access. In my case, it's roughly a little over 1,000 signatures. You know, I've been in politics for 40 years. I've run petition drives before, and that's normally not a problem. This year, though, it's become a huge problem. If a candidate is going to comply with the safety measures that's required from this pandemic, you can't be any closer than 6 feet to a person. So, you know, visualize yourself walking down a sidewalk with a clipboard to throw the clipboard at somebody. Even exchanging pens is a hazard. One-on-one isn't even possible. Large crowds no longer exist. Normally we'd go to like our local farmers market, do that a few weeks and you'd be able to obtain those signatures. We can't do that any longer. We've lost a huge part of our base with Indiana University. They're not here. And I'm not just speaking for my own candidacy, but I think any third party candidate, it's going to be virtually impossible for them to get the required signatures to be on the ballot. And time is of the essence. With the primary now being in June, the cutoff for those petitions is at the end of June. With some decision by the commission, yes or no, would be really appreciated, because right now, I think most third-party candidates are trying to figure out if they can even run at all. And I think if we don't have some kind of flexibility here, and what I would ask the commission to consider is to allow online signatures. You know, we allow voters to register online. I think it'd be reasonable for us to say that that person who registered online could sign a petition for a candidate online. If we could have online signatures, I think most third-party candidates, if they started right away, could probably get that done. If it's delayed much, even that would not be possible. And so if time is a factor that you would consider, extending that time into July as the deadline instead of June, I think would also be helpful. But I do think it's important that third parties participate in this election. And I think the only way possible for that would be some flexibility on how we get these petitions signed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. All right, the next person we have up is Sherry Frank. Sherry, I'm going to go ahead and get you access to speak. If you can just unmute yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Sherry Frank, S-H-A-R-I, last name Frank, F-R-A-N-K. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Brown County. I sent a letter about a couple weeks ago. My concern is primarily the deadline for the absentee mail-in voter ballot. I wonder if we could get an explanation of why noon is considered an appropriate deadline for election day, and how voters can be held accountable for that when they can't predict how long it will take to mail a ballot in, how long it will take to actually be received. And also the midday deadline is so confusing. Every other deadline that is requested by a certain date allows either a postmark or end of day. And the second part of that is, what systems will be available to voters to be available to return absentee ballots? Will there be lock boxes or some other system available? I had more in my letter, but those are my main questions today, so thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And I have done the 5 minutes of allotted time for Susanna. Do you want me to allot the remaining amount for your 15 minutes to public comment?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay.
I thought we were allotting all of the time that Anthony and I had.
Okay, I thought I said 5 minutes each, no problem there. And the next person I have up is Bill Groth. Bill, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Mr. Groth, if you're trying to speak, you are still muted. Is he still online?
He is still online. His hand is still raised. And it does look like that is the last hand for right now. So I will leave that unmuted for now if you guys wanted to continue.
As far as I'm concerned, if the chairman want to weigh in at this point, we'd be more than happy to put them in as a part of our time. Or if everyone who's signed on has spoken that wanted to offer evidence, that's fine. That's what we want to dedicate our time to. I'm not speaking for Susanna on this. She obviously can address this issue herself. I would encourage anyone to send further written material or further testimony for us to review and consider before our next meeting. But the purpose for today was to receive public input and public testimony, and I want to make sure that we have time on the table for that purpose. And if you want to suspend the balance of ours and allow more public comment later, if you guys, the other commissioners, want to utilize their time in the manner they desire.
I appreciate that. Vice Chairman, is Mr. Groth re-engaged in any way, or have we lost him?
He has not, but I do have another person who has raised their hand. So for right now, I will go ahead and disable Mr. Goth and allow Julia Vaughn. If you want to unmute yourself, you have access to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I'm Julia, Julia, Vaughn, V as in Victory, AUGHN. I represent Common Cause Indiana. My organization has communicated with the commission. We sent a letter early this month, I believe, in conjunction with Indiana Vote by Mail and the League of Women Voters of Indiana. I do appreciate the opportunity to underscore some of our points this morning. I would agree with all of the previous speakers. I think you are operating in unprecedented times, and you really need to be thinking creatively and in ways that you probably never envisioned having to think of the administration of elections in Indiana. So it's going to be a challenging election period for voters, for election administrators, for county level officials. We agree with the emphasis on vote by mail, but we are very conscious that most Hoosiers are unfamiliar with voting by mail and certainly are unfamiliar with the deadlines that are involved. So we would really encourage you to, at a minimum, communicate in some way with each registered voter in our state to make sure that they understand what the rules are for casting a ballot by mail. We also strongly encourage you to look at some of the deadlines, which are incredibly restrictive. You know, just last year, the date for applying for a ballot was moved back 4 days. So we would encourage you to use your power in this process to relax that date. Go back to receiving applications 8 days before Election Day. I would underscore the comments by Ms. Frank from Brown County about the noon deadline. I think that's extremely confusing for voters, and I think we are really coming up to a perfect storm. I'm sure that you all have been reading, like I have, the challenges that the United States Postal Service is facing at this time. And so, you know, we're looking at voters returning ballots at a time when they have absolutely no idea how much time it is going to take for that ballot to get returned to the courthouse. So I think, you know, with this election coming up and with the one for November, voters are going to need those folks in state and local government who have the authority to administer election laws to go out of their way to educate, to be accessible and accommodating to voters. And so I would encourage you to do more than just make no excuse absentee voting available to all Hoosiers. We commend you for taking that first step, but that is truly just the first step. And consider all of the extenuating circumstances that are out here in the real world that voters will have to face as they try to engage in the election this year. Please be mindful of those things. And the worst thing in the world that can happen is if people, apply for an absentee ballot, they get it, they vote it, they get it back in what they think will be adequate time, and then they discover that indeed it was not counted. I guess I would say lastly, let's put into place a system that allows folks to follow up after the election and find out if indeed their absentee ballot was counted. This is going to be a big, big learning curve for everybody involved, but in particular the voters. So I would encourage you to do everything in your power to educate voters and make this election truly accessible to all Hoosiers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. We received your joint communication. It appears under date of March the 30th. Recall reading that. Actually, I read it this morning again, based on from Common Cause, Indiana Vote by Mail, and League of Women Voters of Indiana. And we appreciate your comments, and would say that to your comments and to comments that one other presenter that we have addressed in proposed amendments, a number of the issues that you have raised about later receipt of ballots would be counted, the shortening of the time, the ability to have even curbside voting procedures considered, and invite you to look at the proposed amendments that we have filed with the commission, or with the division, for consideration by the commission, and comment further on those individually if you would care to.
Thank you.
All right, we have one more question for right now. Barbara Tolley, I'm going to go ahead and get you set up. If you can just unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Barbara Tully, B-A-R-B-A-R-A-T as in Tom, U-L-L-Y. I am with Indiana Vote by Mail. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. I would echo the comments that have already been made and reinforce the need for transparency around the information shared with voters. I would also ask that the commission consider that the county election staffs in each of the 92 counties in Indiana are really in desperate need of help. And if there is anything that the commission can do to assist the counties with the counting of absentee ballots, I think one of the things that the commission ought to consider, as has been done in other vote by mail states, and there are 5 states that do full-on vote by mail now. They still have in-person polling, but they do mail ballots to every registered voter automatically without people having to apply for them. But I think there needs to be a common envelope design, and I had shared with the Indiana Election Commission what that envelope design from the USPS looks like. It's a size 6x9 envelope. It has a barcode on it that's scannable. And that allows for easy tracing by voters and by election staff. And we really need to ease the burden for election staff. There are also very, very good resources available, which we saw in person. 3 of us from Indiana Vote by Mail traveled to Orange County, California, and to Denver at the very beginning of March, and we're in Denver on Super Tuesday in Orange County, California the day before, and we saw the way that they physically run their elections, and it was a very impressive sight. We were at vote centers and we were at their central election offices, and these things ran like very well-oiled machines. I was impressed, particularly in Denver, that on Super Tuesday, the vote center that we went to had no line of voters Most people return their ballots by mail and by drive-up drop boxes that are located throughout the county. And so this could be accomplished in ways that are well thought out. And I would encourage the Indiana Election Commission to really look at what other states have done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel ourselves. It's been done by others, and we could learn from their mistakes, as Vice Chairman Long said, and their successes, and build something that works for all Hoosier voters. The entire goal of Indiana Vote by Mail is to make sure everybody has equal access to the voting booth, and to make people show up during a 12-hour window on a single day of the year or 2 days of the year, when life is very, very complicated for many, many voters, and now even more complicated because of COVID-19, is asking too much of many, many voters. And I think that we need to make it much more transparent for Indiana's voters. Thank you very much for taking my comments, and I would support what Julia Vaughn and others have said in terms of their support for easing some of the restrictions around voting in Indiana. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. That's the last question we have for right now. And that is time for Ms. Wilson Overholt and Mr. Long as well.
We never heard back from Mr. Groth.
We did not.
Okay. Commission Member Klutz?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would yield my time to you if we wanted to handle it the same way we did with Commissioner Long and Commissioner Overholt, although I'm not sure if there are any other participants wanting to talk. I thought the comments were all very helpful and appreciative, as were the over 200 comments received by mail or email today.
Yeah, Acting Co-Director Lang, can you just, for purposes of the record, let the public know where they can get access to some of those written comments? Will they be posted on any website?
If the commission desires, we can post a link to a document containing those comments on the election division webpage, and then specifically on the page for the election commission.
I mean, I think given the unnatural way in which we're meeting at this point, and that public access is somewhat limited based on technology, that seems like it might be a good idea.
I would echo that. I think my motion was that they're included in evidence and as a part of our minutes. We normally post our minutes, and I anticipated that they would be posted. I realized the volume might require a link with the minutes to reach them for people to see them, but it's important. I agree with Commissioner Klutz that they and yourself that they be available for people to read online, so that everyone can, and they may agree or disagree, and that might stir some more communication.
Can we just do that by consent? We don't think we need to vote on it.
That's good. You have my consent.
I consent.
I consent as well.
Well, like Commissioner Klutz, we've heard from a number of people. We have all these inquiries, comments, and offerings that have been written in or emailed that we now will post with a link to the website. But just to again, kind of for the purpose of the record, clarify, and I commend this body in doing so in a unanimous bipartisan way, we have passed a series of orders that have made no-fault absentee mail-in ballots available to anyone who wants them. And I also want to point out, too, that we've established largely the parameters for how this election is going to be conducted on June 2nd. And I think there will be a lot of communication that will occur between now and then, not least of which should be mentioned that Secretary of State Connie Lawson's PSAs that are now out and running are also, I think, helpful in an effort to make sure the public is educated and has access to information in terms of how they're going to choose to vote on June 2nd in the primary. With that, if there's no further discussion, and having yielded the remainder of our time, I now move to end this portion of the meeting, this discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
before we vote, Mr. Chairman, sorry,
Discussion, sure.
sorry.
No, go right ahead.
So I think an issue, and I'm not sure, I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of it, is well, my understanding, and I think we all agree, is that in order for the existing orders to still be effective June 2nd, we need to meet, I think, on or before May 17th. So I just want to make sure, are we going to, I guess I would like to see us set a date for that meeting now if we can, or just to have
I don't know that we can, it's a good point. Yes, we'll have to meet in May. As to the exact nature of the date, I'm not prepared to do that now, but I'll let the division co-members work towards that in concert with us. And my hope would be that we would choose a date where all of us are available and can attend, presumably by this format. But yeah, there will be a meeting in May, but I'm not in a position to propose an exact date just yet.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted, before we closed out this portion, wanted to make sure. And I guess the other comment I would just make that's pertinent to this portion of the meeting is that I do think, given these statistics, I pay more attention than, well, I'm sure we're all paying a lot of attention to the kind of daily updates in terms of the COVID-19 statistics in the state, and especially in Marion County. And it's just a real concern to me. I was thinking about it this morning, preparing for this meeting, how am I going to vote? I'm one of those people, I usually vote, early in person. And I thought, wow, I've never requested a paper absentee ballot before, and that's going to feel really strange. And, but I thought there's no way I want to go to a polling place or go to a clerk's office, and I don't want to require, I feel right sitting here today, it makes me really uncomfortable to be requiring a large number of folks to have to staff polling locations. I know that we need to have some available, but I just think that I appreciate the flexibility that all of us are showing, but I think it's really important for us to recognize that this is changing on a daily and weekly basis. And while we would all like to think that by June 2nd, we're going to be out of the woods, that, with what we're seeing around the country, I'm not convinced of that. So I think we just all need to recognize, and I hope we all do recognize, that, we may need to change what we've already ordered because of what may happen between now and June 2nd.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I would offer as well, we've protected a lot of essential services, and there are many in the public who feel there's nothing more essential than the opportunity and the ability and the right to vote in person and cast your ballot. Your concerns raised, I think, are shared by all of us. And the young gentleman, I believe Mr. Nardi was his name, the political science student, noted too that there are some that even the opportunity to vote by mail is a daunting challenge, and the best opportunity for them is to be able to cast their ballot in person. So I think I would just reiterate my comments earlier that this commission has done a great job of coming together in a unanimous bipartisan way to make sure that we're prepared to conduct this election on June 2nd. And I look towards Governor Holcomb and Secretary Lawson's leadership, and I know that they're this is about safety and diligence as well as the ability to exercise your right to vote. So I think we're striking the right balance, and we'll take each day as we get it. And once we figure out when we're going to meet in May, we'll get that date posted. And as we have done in the past, I've tried to make sure that I'm coordinating with Vice Chairman Long to ensure that we're at least operating on the same page of cordiality in these meetings, and have an opportunity to make sure all the important things that need to be discussed and heard are discussed and heard. So I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I'd like a couple points. Number one, I'd like to thank Dr. Box, who responded to our letter and directed us to the CDC guidelines. That was appreciated, her efforts to take the time to answer the inquiry that we made and give us guidance in that regard. Like Commissioner Overholt had just said, I've always been a believer in early voting and early voting in person. And it is strange. I'm looking forward to using our online portal to make the request, and maybe the division could give us some idea as to how that is progressing. It was my understanding that the goal was to have it online later this week. If we could find some information, perhaps we can use this forum to disseminate that as to when we might expect that to be operational.
If that's a question posed to me, I don't have the answers for that.
I thought maybe somebody in the division who's working on it might be able to step forward, and obviously I don't have the answer either. I would ask it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd defer to members of the division. Mr. Lang or Co-Director Nussmeier, Matthew Koji, or anybody want to weigh in on that for Vice Chairman Long?
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Sure.
So beginning hopefully Friday, we're still going through testing, and we're doing some user acceptance testing tomorrow. So if everything moves along as planned, either Thursday night or Friday night, there will be a new feature rolled out into indianavoters.com, which is the online voter registration website. If you are currently a registered voter, you can go into the website through your My Voter portal page, and in the left toolbar navigation, there will be an opportunity for a person to apply for an absentee ballot by mail in both English and Spanish, as well as a travel board application. If you click that link, what is the system is designed to do currently, again, there might be some small tweaks between now and Friday, but the system is designed then to populate an absentee ballot request on the next screen. The voter still needs to be currently registered at their registration address. If they aren't, then they'll need to update their registration just like you would do if you had submitted a paper application. And then once you fall out of the 7-day pending period as required by law, then you're able to request that absentee ballot. But assuming you're registered to vote at that address, you can indicate a different mailing address. So if you're anywhere in the world, you can enter a mailing address there. Of course, in a primary, you have to select a political party. So you affiliate with the Democratic or Republican Party. For those individuals who don't affiliate with either party, but you have a public question on the ballot, you can request a public question only ballot in the primary election. Because the commission in order 2020-37 have remove the requirement to include a reason if you want to vote by mail for the June 2nd, 2020 primary election. That reason section is eliminated. And then what will happen is that there's a disclaimer at the bottom that says by hitting submit, you consent to having your signature from your voter registration record applied to the absentee application. And so the voter simply hits submit. And then on the back end, the county users will be able to, what we call in our statewide voter registration system, access a hopper, which will include the list of names of people who submitted that application electronically. And then they're able to print off those applications and process them as they would anything that they would receive by paper. So again, if you're currently registered to vote, you can access the indianavoters.com website. What users might experience too as they log on, just make sure that you are using your name in the exact way that you're registered. We don't allow for wildcard matching. So you'll enter your name, first name, last name, date of birth, and the county. It'll confirm, you hit click. There's a new screen that pops up. A couple of weeks ago, we launched two-factor authentication. So those individuals who want to further protect their personal information within the My Voter portal page can opt in or out. So you either select yes or no if you want to enroll in the two-factor authentication page, and then you end up on your My Voter portal page where you can access that application. So that's all the information that I have currently. I'm happy to defer to Acting Co-Director Lang, Council Kochevar, members of the commission if you have questions.
Mr. Lang, thank you, Co-Director Nussmeier. Mr. Lang, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add, Chairman.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion to conclude this portion of the meeting? Hearing none, do I have a vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. This portion of the meeting is now concluded. As Vice Chairman Long appropriately corrected me, there is the matter of state party conventions that is on the agenda. I would like to provide 5 minutes each to any member or to any of the chair, either of the chairs. I've heard from state party, Republican Party Chairman Hupfer, who has indicated he has nothing to bring before the commission at this time, but Obviously, as we've indicated, we may need to meet here, we will meet here in May, that should there be anything, he reserves the right to bring that before the commission. So that would leave Chairman Zodi. Has he logged on? Does he have anything he'd like the commission to consider relative to the Democratic State Party Convention?
I do see John Zodi logged on. His first name is John, correct?
Yes.
Okay, it was a very particular last name. I'm going to allow him to speak. So, Mr. Zodi, if you have anything to say, feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also add that I don't have much to ask of the commission today. We voted recently, our State Central Committee, to take our convention virtual. In that time, I've talked to the election division. We are sort of going through all the statutes in Title III that would be relevant to the convention, and I don't have anything to ask for at this time. I do sort of look toward the May meeting. If something changes, I would ask us to maybe be able to bring that up at the May meeting if possible, but appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. As noted by Commission Member, or asked by Commission Member Overholt, and we will have a meeting in May, and when that date is set, we'll get that posted, obviously in accordance with the law, but we'll try and find a date where all of us can be in attendance without need for a proxy. I think we finished our business for today. I appreciate all those who participated. Thank you to Stuart Richardson for running a smooth Zoom meeting process today. I'd simply ask if there's a motion for the Indiana Election Commission to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you
all.
Thanks, everyone.